The topic of my presentation today is rather complicated and difficult, and that is Korea. Peace and reunification, challenges and opportunities. There are a lot of challenges, but we should explore opportunities as well. Very broad topic. I'll try to organize this presentation into 4 or 5 different categories. First of all, to assess the Korean situation, the stalemate under Korea in terms of relationship between North and South, we have to know the historical context. In fact, for anything, even individuals, in order to understand the character and the attributes of the person, you have to know the personal history. And here, in order to understand inter-Korean relations, the Korean security peace situation, we have to begin with the Japanese occupation. That is the most important one. Without Japanese occupation, the Korea would not have been divided. But more importantly, Japanese occupation, the colonial power of Japan, was so aggressive, so manipulative, so exploiting, and it made the Koreans suffer a great deal. During the Japanese occupation, what has happened in both North and South Korean parts? Exceeding degree of proliferation of nationalist movements, nationalist sentiments. Korea is a very nationalistic country that includes both North and South Korea. Koreans, they pretended to be global, but they are very exclusive people. Korean people do not welcome interracial marriages. Usually that's the case. So nationalism was developed due to Japanese oppression. So there, North Korea became much more nationalistic. Kim Il-sung, of course, in their propaganda situation, Kim Il-sung single-handedly liberated Korea as a country, but without his struggle for independence against Japan, Kim Il-sung's charisma, his power, would not have been effectively constructed as they have. So that is the Japan's colonialization. After the independence, in 1945, soon after that, 2 separate governments were created, North Korea and South Korea, both in 1948. These 2 systems were created as a result of the supervision and tutelage of the Soviet Union for the North and the United States for the South. So the country was divided because of the occupation of the Korean Peninsula by these 2 victors in the Second World War. When they divided the country, very soon, what happened? Korea War. Within a couple of years, Korea War broke out. That war was not civil war, as some scholars suggested. It was an international war, conflict. On the one hand, you have the Soviet Union and the Communist bloc. On the other hand, you have the United States and its allies, usually using the shield of the United Nations. There were 15 countries sent their personnel in uniforms to Korea conflict, and there are some more countries got involved in helping militarily and so forth. But it was a very legitimate international conflict. Followed by, you have the Cold War decades. During the Korean War, something remarkable happened, and that is separation of families. Families got divided, and some retained in the north, some in the south. So North and South Korea, family division was a very dramatic and massive national event of the occupation. Now, even today, there are countless family members wanting to get reunited, but that's a challenge that Korean governments have never successfully alleviated, the pains of divided families. That's a unique Korean character. And then you have the Cold War decades. 6 long decades of Cold War, represented by global power polarization by the United States and Soviet Union. The two parts of Korea became the forefronts of world order. The two worlds were not only ideologically contrasting, but also their values, their lifestyles, their ways of life were entirely different. So the Soviet and Communist bloc, America and the liberal democratic bloc exerted very serious influence on the minds and structures and cultures of both North and South Korea. How did they do it? That's my next topic. I will elaborate. During the 6 decades of Cold War, Korea was completely overwhelmed by foreign influence. South Korea has been, even today, completely under the influence and control of the United States of America. And the Soviet Union is gone, but Communist bloc, represented by China, is still there, very intact. So the influence of Chinese and Communists on North Korea is truly remarkable. Now, here you have the Cold War situation. Cold War was represented by military tension. We had accumulation of weapons of mass destruction, including especially nuclear bombs. That is the name of the Cold War that we experienced. So here, accumulation of weapons led to the creation of military culture. Military culture became both the Soviet bloc and American bloc. It's rampant all over. The military culture is none other than white-black culture. There is no middle ground. You either stand with you as your friend or enemy. You have to destroy the enemy. There's no middle ground in military culture. That kind of culture has dominated both North and South Korea. And the pluralistic culture never developed. It's mostly friends and foes. So that kind of culture is a military culture. It has been so prevalent throughout both North and South Korea. Not only that, the military culture became instrumental to military economy. As we all know, military-industrial complex, the term President Dwight D. Eisenhower coined in 1961. Once military collided with industry, It is very forceful, and more importantly, it is very corruptible. That's what we have had in the Cold War era, in arms race. Both sides developed arms economy, arms culture. So we have had, during the Cold War era, confrontations without military clash. But the confrontation was more cultural, more behavioral, more political. Both North and South Korea inherited these two worlds and became, as I said, the forefront of the Cold War era. Now, Cold War has ended as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. What does that mean? The United States became the only superpower, and the United States is almighty in terms of military power, in terms of economic capability. Because of that, United States has been somewhat colonial, somewhat exploitive of third world countries. That prompted widespread and growing anti-American sentiment. Today's ISIS and all the terrorist kind of development is as a result of anti-Americanism, as a result of America's emerging as the only superpower in the world. Now, in this situation, North Korea could not develop socialist system, could not depend on the Soviet Union or China, because the communist bloc got divided, the Chinese line and the Soviet line, whereas the United States enjoyed its monopolist power occupation in a lot of free world, including certainly South Korea. So, in this situation, the two developed what I call the security culture. The two were comparing themselves with each other as the sole legitimate state. Here, I would suggest that inter-Korea relations during the Cold War era and post-Cold War era has been one of legitimacy competition. North Korea claims to be the only sole legitimate state in the peninsula. South Korea did the same in the Korean peninsula, suggesting that there's no way that the two can live together. Each system defines the boundary of the system to include the entire peninsula and define the national characteristics in terms of the characteristics of the Korean peninsula. So there's no way that the security way of looking at, no way of dividing the country, half of it occupied by the North, half of it occupied by the South, because you cannot allow two different regimes in the peninsula. So you have to have one legitimate state. That has been the case. Who is more legitimate? If a country is not legitimate, it will collapse. Economic difficulty will not cause any system to collapse, but legitimacy crisis will. If South Korea loses the basis of legitimacy to the North, South Korea fears that it will lose, it will collapse. Certainly North Korea will do the same. So here, legitimacy competition. We cannot live together. One of us must go. That kind of mentality, since the Korean War, has prevailed and intensified throughout Korea and Korean minds. So with this, the big question is unification a possibility? It may appear to be a fantasy. We have to examine a little more carefully. If you examine the fantasy area, there are enough reasons for anyone to believe that unification is unrealistic goal and it is a daydream or fantasy. Many people are subscribing to that notion. But if you examine carefully, both fantasy and the possibility of reunification, both may be observed. First of all, the fantasy. The difference between North and South Korea, as we see it today, after long years and decades of Cold War and Korean War and so forth, we see a set of incompatible characteristics of the systems and peoples. Incompatible. That is, they are like oil and water, cannot mix together. So reunification is a fallacy, it is a daydream, it's impossible, just like you cannot mix oil with water. So here, some of the characteristics are these. North Korea has become a collectivistic system, collective orientation. Everything is determined by group. More specifically, the Korea Labor Party wields all political powers and military powers. And decisions are always made through dialogue, through deliberations, and through competition of ideas. But in the end, you'll have one collective opinion. That's North Korea. The life is collective. South Korea is individualistic, very individualistic, and therefore collective communal efforts often are ineffective. To say South Korean culture and behavioral norms are individualistic, you don't have to go beyond their economic activities. Very individualistic. Now, in terms of competitions, all individual-based competitions. Whereas in North Korea, they don't compete on individual basis. They compete by groups. Different colleges and universities will compete rather than individuals or even teams. So that is the individualistic and collectivistic characteristics. They don't mix. They are like water and oil. Second characteristic difference is North Korea is very nationalistic, whereas South Korea is very global. If you look at their economic activities, their social, cultural attributes, you'll see North Korea is very nationalistic, whereas South Korea is global and international. The two don't mix very easily. And thirdly, you have North Korea is much more ideological, much more conceptual, whereas South Korea is much more pragmatic and economical. Economic emphasis in the South, ideological emphasis in the North. You will see North Korea as a form of religious community, highly metaphysical system of ideas, whereas South Korea is all economy. Money determines everything in the South as well as in the United States of America. Now, with these separate characteristics, how can we promote integration or unification? The thesis that unification is a fantasy is well taken. But is that the case? Oil and water can be mixed through chemical interaction rather than physical or biological interaction. So here I'm suggesting that the seemingly incompatible North and South Korean differences can be bridged through what I call dialectical synthesis of dialectical logic rather than physical logic. Thesis, because of the internal contradictions, becomes antithesis. Antithesis for internal contradictions becomes synthesis. The synthesis is a unified whole, integrated, harmonized whole. So, by looking at the mechanisms of dialectical synthesis, we learn from that process, that logic, that two Koreas can be unified and can become one. We have to study and learn dialectical logic itself. So here, what I would suggest is all the security paradigm. Both Koreas have been enslaved by security obsessions and security paradigm. Security paradigm is based on the premise that domination is the answer to all kinds of problems. Control, being superior, more powerful, wealthier, and all these things are security paradigm. Peace paradigm is different. What is peace? Peace is not the absence of conflict. The absence of conflict is the absence of conflict. It's not a peace. Peace is harmony, the creation of oneness out of diversity. That is what peace is all about. Therefore, diversity is a prerequisite condition for peace. The fact that North and South Korea are discretely different and diverse, indeed, that can be very welcome sign from the perspective of dialectical synthesis. That's what we have to strive for. Instead of rejecting each other, we have to study, put ourselves in each other's shoes. Through empathizing process, we'll find a way of living together and finding common prosperity. What we need is common experience. We have to create a situation where differences can be interacted, communicated, and a harmonious relationship may evolve. This very final stage, how we go about, is something I'll develop in a moment. I mentioned that peace is harmony, not the absence of conflict. Harmony requires diversity. Diversity needs to be integrated through the process of dialectical logic. And it is not very philosophical. It's a common sense. Just like harmony in musical harmony situation. If you have one sound, one instrument, you cannot have harmony. Harmony requires the presence of diversity, the presence of differences. The more diverse, the more different the objects are, potentially the greater harmony would be. So if you look at North and South Korea, the two are almost hopelessly divided, hopelessly diverse, hopelessly not integratable. So in this situation, the harmony, if you ever create harmony, it will be truly huge, great harmony. That's what I'm thinking of. That's what Koreans must be thinking about. North and South Korea is so different, so painfully divided, but if we find harmony between the two. This will be great harmony. This kind of harmony can solve all the divisive problems of the world. So here, in terms of concretely North and South Korea, I think it was 2004. North and South Korea decided to develop common project at Kaesong Industrial Complex. They developed joint economic cooperation, cooperative means of living together there in that little city. For 12 solid years, the city has survived. The investors from South Korea, workers from North Korea have uniformly been happy. But now, at this very moment, Park Geun-hye government discontinued it. It will revive soon. Now, I'm thinking about if the possibility of North and South Korea jointly living together, as in the case of Kaesong, South Korean capital and technology, North Korean labor, logistical characteristics, they all put together very productively. That should be continued. We should have expansion of the economic collaboration in the area of diversifying production lines, not only just the textile industry, but even high-tech, fourth industrial revolution stage. North Korea is exceedingly well developed in the area of computer, information technology. The world doesn't know that. In North Korea, there are more than 10,000 younger people being trained in the area of cyber technology. So don't underestimate the potential of North Koreans developing the fourth industrial revolution. Now we should try to use the Kaesong Industrial Complex, that area, expand in terms of diversities of economic collaboration, cooperation. Also would have to expand it so that global investors and global technologies and so forth will be invested in Kaesong. So globalization of Kaesong is important. It will be done, it can be done, it should be done in order to be competitive in the international market. Now then, it needs to be more than economic community. We need to have more comprehensive areas with a university. I would propose that we need to have a comprehensive Kaesong University, Peace University. This university can have different colleges with different specializations, like a medical school. North and South Korea, they have very sophisticated and very developed medicines. In the South Korea, it's a Western medicine. North Korea, it's Eastern medicine. The two are mutually complementing. This kind of university must have a medical college where the relationship between the two will be developed and constructed. And I like to see a hospital there, a kind of university teaching hospital, where doctors and students around the world will come and learn the integration of Eastern medicine, which is basically preventive medicine, and Western medicine, treatment medicine. It can work together. When I visited North Korea a few years ago, I had some fever, I have some problems. So I visited the medical institution there. They sent me to a hospital. At the hospital, I was lying down, and there were about about 10, 12 doctors. On one side, you had Eastern doctors, they call Korea medicine doctors. On the other side, I had Western doctors. They each came up with their assessment of my illness and the diagnosis, and then explained it to me. And then they told me how they would do by way of treating my problem. So I listened to both sides. I had to choose one. I could have combined some of it, some of that, but I was given complete freedom to choose how I want to be treated. And it worked. I came out of the hospital after 4 hours. I walked on my way out, and I was healthy again. I like to see that kind of hospital, that kind of medical science, comprehensive one, in Kaesong Industrial Complex, a medical school there. I'd like to see a peace theory, not security, but peace paradigm study, peace college. I'd like to see an environmental college. By the way, the Kaesong Industrial Complex should incorporate in time the demilitarized zone too. It's right there. To expand the territory of Kaesong Industrial Park, Industrial Complex, to include the Peace Park. This Peace Park can be very lucrative economically because of the tourist site and research site. So I like to see the unified Korea, at least that government, should annex the demilitarized zone and make use of it economically as well as educationally. I like to see a comprehensive school of art. Music, for example, you have Eastern music and Western music combined. I like to encourage young composers to develop global or peace musical pieces by integrating both Eastern and Western musical knowledge and experiences. So these are some of the ideas. Schools will have industrial cooperation, collaboration. It will be economically viable, and revenues can be generated within and by the Kaesong industrial operation. So we don't have to worry about how to fund that. I like to see this kind of government developed. It will be an ideal community in the world. I like to have a Kaesong industrial cities, residential arrangement will be completely futuristic, energy, self-sufficient, renewable energy, all of it. And then, of course, I like to see not confrontation, not competition to dominate one another, but collaboration, cooperation, and harmonizing, so that peace at all levels in the society, at the family level, the societal level, national level, it will be peace. And also politically, I like to see a unified government combining socialist countries' strength and democratic countries' strength. Democracy's greatest value is liberty. Socialists' greatest value is equality. Who will say one is expendable? Both are dearly needed. In order to promote socialism or equality, we can learn from North Korean experience. You know, knowing North Korea a lot, people ask me a lot of questions. I mean, it's a very poor country, but what is the greatest thing North Korea has? I would say equality. They would say equally poor. I said, yes, equally poor. That's better than unequally distributed rich country. Because there will be less human exploitation, treatment of human beings will be much more humane, and there are a lot of things they can learn. We can learn from North Korean experience. Yes, South Korea is one of the remarkable successful economies in the world. So we have to acknowledge the importance of South Korean development, and combine South Korean experience with North Korean socialist and egalitarian-based treatment of people in the society. We can envision, again, this is a visionary, envision an ideal community of South Korea, of unified Korea. Increasingly, that will motivate others in the world to learn from the Korean example. So the world will become much more just, devoid of terrorism and all that. A peaceful world. South Korea. One more thing is, both in North Korea share common experience, very bitter common experience, including Japanese colonialism and all the oppressive regimes of China throughout the Korean history. A lot of experience, painful experience. Experience is the mother of wisdom. So this experience, we can be an excellent people in the world that can do something good for humanity. I like to see both North-South Korean young people, students and scholars, they develop genuine sense of pride, genuine sense of positive thinking about what they can do for the world. So I think it's possible if we started right, and the Kaesong Industrial Complex and university educational experience will certainly be very handy for this purpose. Thank you.